Hey guys, D. Bonnie here, ER doctor turned marriage coach. Hey guys, D. Bonnie here. Hey listen, I'm excited to come on here and talk to you today about, well, it's about an issue that's kind of deep, but I think it's worth exploring. I think that part of being human, and in fact being in relationship with other humans, is that we're going to get hurt. We're going to wound each other. And the crazy thing is that the closer you are to somebody, the more vulnerable you allow yourself to be so that you have that deep intimacy, the more at risk you are of being hurt deeply. So for me, if you know my story, my deepest wound came 3 years ago when I found out that Megan had been unfaithful to me. Now, there's a link that we'll put here and you can catch the video where I kind of unpack that. And when you see that, you'll see that I've caused my own wounds in people. So this is not at all about blaming. And in fact, our story is amazing because it's about two people seeing the potential that they have to continue to cause injury to one another, to themselves, to other people, and realizing that we were not at all good at being our own gods, our little g gods, like being the thing that was master over our lives. So our story is about overcoming obstacles. It's about learning to see in ourselves that brokenness and developing empathy for one another, reestablishing trust, and continuing to move forward despite the odds. So our story is amazing. Like, that's why I'm on here with this platform to talk to you, because it's about everything that God's done in our lives to repair what we have. And it's about us really trying to take a look and see, how are we designed to do marriage? But I don't know if you've experienced something similar. Do you have a deep wound that maybe it's never healed? And maybe this is something that has come from your spouse. You know, maybe it wasn't even something monumental like infidelity or hiding $100,000 in debt. Maybe it wasn't something like that. Maybe you've experienced the wound of just dying 1,000 cuts, like over time, over years and decades. The two of you have just inflicted little injury after little injury after little injury. And you aren't even sure that you can forgive some of them or all of them. And you keep experiencing this pain and you don't really know how to move forward. Or maybe it's something that's happened before you were even with your spouse. Sometimes we carry into adulthood injuries that happened to us when we were little kids. You know, sometimes we carry around these injuries from childhood that persist with us as adults. You know, maybe it's abandonment. Maybe it's lack of trust. Maybe we grew up learning not to forgive, to hold a grudge. Maybe you've dealt with abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And all these things cause these deep wounds that we bring into our current relationships. And then another thing is your wound, the pain that you feel, it might not even be from something that's been done to you. You might still be harboring guilt and pain from injuries that you've caused other people, people that you love. And you know, a couple of bad decisions, and then before you know it, you've caused suffering in another person. And that's your wound that you're trying to get better from. You know, sometimes I think it would be better if our life was like a Microsoft Word document, right? And you could just highlight the part of pain and regret and hit the delete button and rewrite that section. Unfortunately, life does not operate that way. And so I want to talk a little bit today about forgiveness, but then I want to lead into, and this is really what I want to connect with you on. What do you do when the I'm sorry that you get from the person just is not enough to anesthetize the pain? See, I think we get an injury. I'll use an example from the ER with lacerations and wounds. We get an injury, right, and it's opened up and it's fresh. And then over time, it starts healing in. So maybe we get some sutures and that repairs it faster. Maybe you do something in your relationship to sort of jumpstart the healing. Over time, that wound starts not being as sensitive. It's not as painful, and it starts healing in. But then there's times, and I know you've been there, there's times that something triggers that wound it tears back open. Or even if it's a hardened scar, there's something that makes it start hurting again. There's a reminder, a trigger, and all of a sudden, even like if someone has an amputated extremity, they can feel phantom pain years later. Sometimes those old wounds that we feel like we've dealt with, we've done the stuff, we've worked through it, but they still hurt. So I want to talk about what do you do when you've done all the work and you've forgiven, but it still hurts. And I'm sorry just doesn't take away that pain. So let's talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness, man, that's a huge topic. I want you to just pause right now and think for a second. What do I think forgiveness is? Like really, like literally pause this and contemplate in your mind what that word means to you. See, forgiveness is so multifaceted that one liner is not enough to encompass what forgiveness is. But I think that it's important that we analyze this, because if we're going to work towards fixing the problems in our marriage, whether it was that one huge monumental issue or it's that 1,000 cuts that just keeps wounding us over and over again, we got to talk about forgiveness. So let's take a look at a few things that forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not denying that a wrong happened. You know, a lot of times as kids, I think we're playing together and one kid does something that upsets another person or physically inflicts some harm, and we're told by the adults, hey, you need to go apologize. Go say you're sorry. And so the kid walks over and says, I'm sorry. And then the other child is expected to accept that, and then we want them to continue playing on as if everything was fine. That's a very immature approach to forgiveness. It does not really address the fact that a wrong has occurred. But I think a lot of times as adults, right, we want to get off that easy. I know I've done it. You know, there's a spat, I say things that I shouldn't say, and I'm like, I'm sorry. And then later I'm like, well, I said I was sorry. And yet that's not really addressing the fact that a wrong had occurred. So don't think that when you forgive someone, you're letting them off the hook. We'll get to that in a minute. Maybe you are to some degree, but forgiveness is not denying that something wrong happened. It's not supposed to be just sweeping it under the rug and acting like everything's fine. That won't get you very far. So the other thing about forgiveness is it can't really be forced. Like if you're the one who's injured, that other person cannot force you to forgive them. You know, maybe there's some control aspects and they can kind of make you pretend like everything's fine. But forgiveness happens in here, and I control what happens in here. And I think if you've caused someone an injury, maybe you can relate to this. You really just want to control, alt, delete that. You want to apologize and say that you're sorry, and you want them to just act like everything is fine. A lot of times that type of apology, that type of request for forgiveness is one where you don't even get a full apology, right? It's something like, well, I'm sorry that you got upset. That's taken no ownership in the injury that occurred. Or maybe it's something like, I'm sorry that you took it that way. Or maybe it's, I'm sorry that I yelled at you, but, and then you fill in the blank where you actually make the injured person the one responsible for the conflict, the one who's responsible for their own injury. I'm sorry I yelled at you, but if you hadn't been treating me that way, right? So that's not forgiveness. The third thing that forgiveness is not is it's not reconciliation. Now, this is a marriage platform, and I think reconciliation, of course, is important as we wound and injure each other, and we come back together, and we learn forgiveness and empathy, and we reconcile that. But reconciliation is a separate topic than forgiveness. And then the fourth thing that forgiveness is not a get out of jail free card. It is not the sparing of consequences necessarily. Now, if you and your spouse have an issue and then you forgive and you're working towards reconciliation, then yeah, maybe you're not making that person pay as much as they ought to for what they did. But forgiveness itself does not mean that consequences are spared. An example is, let's say someone comes into my house and robs us and takes, $500. I might forgive that person, but that does not mean that I want that person spared the legal consequences of committing that crime. Forgiveness is different. Consequences are separate, and consequences, they can still keep rolling on even when forgiveness, even when reconciliation have taken place. It's said that forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself. And I think that's definitely true, but I think it's also a gift that you offer the other person. You see, basically, when you offer forgiveness, what you're doing is you're relinquishing your control over the situation. Like, wait a minute. What do you mean your control? I'm the one that was injured. I was not in control. That's why I got injured. True, but after the fact, because we as humans, we crave justice. Like, there's a part inside of us that wants to see the scales balanced, right? We see something that happens on the news, someone is hurt or murdered. We want justice. That's part of how God designed us. It's part of this moral code that's inside of us, is we want justice. So when I'm the injured party and I make a decision that I'm not going to hold that offense over you, and I'm not going to make you suffer, I'm actually relinquishing control of the situation, where I say, okay, I'm forgiving you. You no longer owe me. You no longer have to make that right. I'm not going to balance the scales myself. I'm letting go of it. That's forgiveness. That's me letting go of hatred and bitterness. And I'm basically saying, I'm not going to give those thoughts space in my brain. I'm not going to let my mind dedicate any real estate to wishing harm on you, to holding this against you, to figuring out how I could get even. That's forgiveness. So is it possible to do all the things working to forgive that person in your heart? Is it possible to even be establishing trust again and empathy and reconciliation, and yet still suffer the pain of the wound that occurred? I think it's absolutely possible. I think it's possible that you can do all of the things necessary for your healing, and yet still that wound, it cuts so deep, it was so penetrating, that even as it heals and something comes along and it breaks back open, or like I said, even once that scar tissue's there and it's tough, it can still throb. It can still flare up. There can still be triggers and reminders and things that make that pain come to the surface, even though you're doing the right things. So what do we do? What do we do when the offender's "I'm sorry," heartfelt "I'm sorry," repentant, turning away from that previous behavior? What do we do when even that's not enough to anesthetize our pain? Here's 4 steps, 4 tactics that I want you to implement starting today that I think will help over time decrease that pain, even if it doesn't eliminate it completely. The first idea is I want you to take a look at the wound and figure out if you are hurt so badly because of what your spouse did, because what happened in that relationship. Maybe it's not even your spouse. Maybe it's a parent. It could be someone who's no longer even alive. But I want you to look at that and figure out, did that hurt so bad because the act itself was so egregious that I'm suffering still? Or is it because there was an old wound there that never actually healed? Maybe your spouse has done something to you that's really just boom, it's off the charts pain. But if you really stop and digest it, maybe it's not what he or she did. Maybe it's because it flared up something from long ago. And if that's the case, you got to start with going back and figuring that out. You might have to sit down with a counselor and unpack that and learn how to start healing from what happened in the past so that the things that happen today, they don't have that same level of impact on you. I think it's important that we start looking at our emotions. Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm hurt. But let's peel back some layers and let's see what's underlying that anger. What's under there? Is it that, okay, well, I'm actually hurting so bad because I feel betrayed? Or I'm hurting so bad because my pride got really damaged when that thing happened to me. And I believe that if you can start peeling back the layers below the hurt, below the anger, then you can introspect and you can take a look and start identifying the little pieces of this, and maybe it'll make more sense to you. I think that's one great step towards figuring out how to heal from this wound. The second step, and this is going to blow your mind, I want you to realize your own potential to harm. What? Yeah, I want you to realize your own potential to cause harm to other people. You see, it's very easy for me to identify when someone else has done something that hurts me, right? It's blatantly obvious. But I don't always notice when I'm doing something that's causing harm. And then if I want to go even deeper, I can take a look at this part inside me that is really dark, that has the potential to inflict severe wounds. Like, is it just me? Am I alone? Or do you actually find that there's parts of your mind that sometimes goes to a really dark place of like, I could retaliate like this. And then you don't, because you are a fairly well-balanced, mentally healthy person. But realize, like, this darkness, it resides within all of us. In fact, part of my worldview as a Christ follower is I have to realize that there is a bent in me, a tendency towards doing wrong and harm, a tendency towards evil, if I can say that. And so when I start realizing these dark thoughts, this potential that's inside of me, it actually helps me have more empathy towards the person who did me wrong. Because maybe, given the same circumstances and opportunity, maybe I would have done the same thing. History has played out over and over again that we as humans have the potential to inflict serious harm on one another. And you might think that you would never do it, but the studies say that you would. There was an interesting, I won't get into the whole thing, but there was an interesting study that was done years ago. And it was the person being studied had to deliver electrical impulses to a person on the other side of a screen. And the guy in the back of the room had a white coat on and a clipboard. And the thing was, when the person with the electrical button, the electrical stimulus, asked a question and the guy on the other side of the screen got it wrong, he would deliver a little jolt. And they started off mild and they increasingly became more painful. Now, the beauty of the story is the guy on the other side of the screen was in on it. He wasn't getting any jolts of electricity. But most people, at the urging of the guy with the white coat and the clipboard, continued all the way to the end, even though the person on the other side of the screen was begging them to stop. We have the potential to inflict harm on one another. And I'm no different and you're no different. The third thing that I want to encourage you to do to overcome this pain is to focus on the now. Especially if you're in a relationship with someone and they're doing the right things to repair the injury, right? They're not continuing to do the harmful thing. They are adamant about trying to make it right. This person that you're in relationship with wants to serve you, wants to just make things better. If that person's really doing the right stuff, I want you to focus on your now. Because for me and Megan, like our now is amazing. You know, I'm married to a woman who has become a godly woman, a woman who seeks to serve God, serve me as her husband, serve her family, right? So for me to overcome this old injury that does still cause pain at times, I have to spend my time focusing on now. I have to look at the beautiful gift that our life is. And how do I go about doing that? Well, for me, a lot of my focusing on the now comes in the form of journaling. I've tried to make it a habit every day to put pen to paper, to get these thoughts in my head out so that I can analyze them, so that I can take a better look at where I am. I focus on gratitude, right? I make a list of things that I'm grateful for. And when that old wound tries to flare up, when it tries to sear and cause pain again, I can revert to these disciplines. I pray. I pray for God to allow me to continue to focus on the now, that He obliterate that rearview mirror so that I bring my camera lens into focus on what's important now. And you have that choice. You get to aim that camera lens wherever you want in your life. And if you want to look back at the harmful, the hurt, if you want to go back to your childhood and stay focused on what someone did when you were a little child that injured you, you have the right to do that. But that is not going to allow you to continue to move forward. But if I can focus on things that are going well now, if I can look for those and observe them, it allows me to stay in the present, and it allows that wound to not cause such sharp pain. The fourth and final idea is I want you to define your identity. So we have a choice. We can view ourselves as victims. We can continue to identify with that part of our life where we were injured, and we can allow that to define us in the present and the future. Or we can shift our focus. We can identify as someone who's strong, someone who's been through some pain, but who has grown as a result of that. Someone who now has skills in life that he wouldn't have if he had not been through these episodes of pain that had come his way. You have the same option. For me, I had to really find that my identity is as an adopted child of God. That may not be your worldview, but it's my worldview. So I have to realize when that scar starts flaring up and it tries to hurt me again, I have to realize that my real identity comes not from any earthly relationship. I love them and I cherish them, but at the end of the day, my real identity comes from this relationship. And so for me, that's what I use to help me so that these old injuries that I've sustained in my life, these old injuries that I've caused other people that still hurt me, so that they don't define my current existence. You know, I can look back and see them and know that they were there. I can look at the growth that's happened as a result of what I've been through. I don't allow that stuff to define me. Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." 2 verses later, in verse 30, he says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What's he mean by that? Well, a yoke is a wooden structure. He maybe even made those when he was a carpenter. But it connects two animals that are working towards the same goal. So what he's saying there is that he's going to do the heavy lifting. And so for me, that's where my confidence comes from. That's where my new identity comes from. Because I know that as I go through life, and I have ups and downs, and I have hurts, and I'm not done having hurts. Jesus guaranteed us there would be trouble. We're living in a broken world. I'm not done with the injuries. I'm also probably not done injuring people. But as I go through life, through those ups and downs, when I give Him my burden, He does the heavy lifting. Now I realize that may not be part of your worldview. I'm here to offer to you what has helped me, what has helped Megan, what has blessed our relationship. Listen, guys, I hope you have found this helpful. I hope that you can take those old wounds, those old injuries, and that you can learn to heal from them, that you can learn to forgive, that when appropriate, you can learn to then develop trust with the person who's injured you. I hope that you find empathy within you. I hope that you are, especially with your spouse, able to work on reconciliation after either a huge injury or multiple little injuries over years and decades. I want you to take this with you through the week. Start implementing these things. Start taking a look at what you're actually feeling, whether your injury comes from what actually happened or whether it's from something previous. I want you to take a look in your own heart. Realize your own potential to harm. Use that to fuel empathy towards other people around you. I want you to also spend time focusing on your now, especially if you've done the work and you are working on healing from those things that have happened, especially if you're working with your spouse to overcome some bad things in the past. Start focusing on your now. Don't let your yesterday poison your today. Life is too short. And as long as there's not new poison coming into your water today, be thankful. Let yesterday stay where it was. It's best there. And then the fourth thing I want you to do is to find your identity. Find your identity in being a strong person, in being a survivor, in being someone who has overcome obstacles and is still standing. Find your identity in being a child of God. Look, if this was helpful, please share it with people. I think people around us need to hear uplifting messages. We need to learn how to deal with all the hurt that life gives us, all the hurt that we give each other. Leave a comment. Come over to my website, dbonnie.com, for more instructional videos. And I'm happy that you're on here and you're paying attention. I love you guys.